The UN Security Council has been warned that a famine in the Ethiopian region of Tigray is now affecting more than 400,000 people. The meeting was also told that the conflict in the region between Tigrayan forces and Ethiopian federal troops may rapidly deteriorate. President Biden says the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan is on track but won't be completed in the next few days. He was speaking hours after the US left its main military base in the country, which served as the hub of US-led operations for almost 2 decades. Brazil's Prosecutor General has asked for authorization to investigate President Bolsonaro for failing to act on allegations of corruption in the purchase of coronavirus vaccines. A whistleblower said government officials had agreed to take bribes.
Iranian state media report that the country's largest Navy ship caught fire and sank in the Gulf of Oman. The world's largest meat processor, Brazil's JBS, says it is making progress in recovering from a cyber attack that closed many of its operations. Malaysian officials say they will demand that Chinese diplomats explain why Chinese military planes entered Malaysian airspace over the South China Sea on Monday. And the African Union suspends Mali's membership in the group and threatens to order further restrictions unless a civilian government is returned to power.
We begin here in Japan, where the Tokyo Olympics will finally kick off in 3 weeks after a year's delay. Foreign athletes and officials continue to arrive Friday and head to their training bases across the country under tightened anti-coronavirus measures. Those include taking tests upon arrival and every day during their stay. Sakai Town in Ibaraki Prefecture, north of Tokyo, welcomed Argentine judoka Paula Pareto. The gold medalist at the 2016 Rio Games will stay there until July 18th. The town will host about 70 Argentine delegation members, including team officials. They'll only be allowed to come and go between their accommodation and the training sites. Now, officials in Tokyo are grappling with a recent surge in coronavirus cases and its potential impact on the Olympics. Governor Koike Yuriko has said officials need to seriously consider holding the Games without any spectators.
We need to consider what should be appropriate regarding the number of spectators. Having the Games with no spectators is a viable option while we closely monitor the situation.
Koike's remarks come after officials announced 660 new coronavirus cases in Tokyo on Friday. That marks a week-on-week increase in the capital for 13 straight days. A member of the government's expert panel is warning the situation could become more serious later this month.
At this stage, Tokyo and 3 other neighboring prefectures are entering the 5th wave of an infection spike.
Under the current plan, up to 10,000 spectators will be allowed at events as long as venues do not exceed 50% capacity. But that's only if the quasi-emergency measures imposed on Tokyo and neighboring areas end on July 11th as scheduled. The head of the organizing committee said officials from Tokyo and the central government, as well as the IOC, will discuss the spectator issue as early as next week. Moving now to South Korea, where people are also facing a new surge in coronavirus infections amid a spread of the Delta variant, first identified in India. Daily cases have topped 800 for the first time since January. Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum held an emergency news conference on Friday. He said 90% of cases of the variant have been reported in Seoul and the surrounding areas. He called for immediate measures to prevent the virus from spreading, warning the country faces a serious crisis. The surge has put a damper on the return of people to normal life. Authorities had planned to ease restrictions on opening hours for bars and restaurants in the capital area from Thursday, but that plan has now been called off. Malaysia has taken delivery of about 1 million coronavirus vaccine doses provided for free by Japan. The AstraZeneca vaccine arrived at an airport near the capital Kuala Lumpur on Thursday evening.
These vaccines will be utilized as quickly as possible. And it is a testament to the long relationship and friendship between the governments of Malaysia and Japan.
Malaysia has been battling a spike in infections since mid-May. Economic activities have been severely restricted. Securing vaccines has become an urgent issue in the country. More than 16 million people, about half the population, say they want to get vaccinated, but so far a little more than 5.7 million have received their first shot. About 1 million doses from Japan also arrived in Indonesia. Japan has provided vaccines to Taiwan and Vietnam and will supply them to the Philippines and Thailand. Now, Japanese Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide has pledged to provide 3 million vaccine doses to Pacific Island nations and help with the infrastructure to keep them refrigerated.
Japan will provide equipment and technical support to help the region establish cold chain logistics to transport vaccines. And we will also provide comprehensive support from healthcare systems to economic recovery.
Suga said the shots will be provided by around the end of the year. They'll be offered through the global COVAX initiative for fair distribution. Protests continued in Myanmar on the day that marked 5 months since the military coup on February 1st. In the biggest city of Yangon, hundreds of demonstrators took to the streets on Thursday to show resistance against the military. People waved torches and burned military uniforms. Many gave three-finger salutes and called for democracy. A spokesperson for UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres reiterated calls for the immediate release of Aung San Suu Kyi and others arbitrarily detained. The spokesperson added there's deep concern over the continued violence and intimidation. On Wednesday, the military released over 2,000 detainees. Aung San Suu Kyi and other political leaders continue to remain in custody. A local human rights group says more than 5,000 people have been arrested since the coup, with many being tortured. One recently released journalist says that was the cruelty he faced at the hands of the military. NHK World's Sahataya Kraikuntot spoke with him about his detention.
It's very difficult to describe the experience of the hell. I was trying to make sure that I'm ready to die.
Myanmar-born American journalist Nathan Mao is the editor-in-chief of the Myanmar online news platform Kamayut Media. He was arrested in March and charged with spreading fake news. He says the military suddenly came to his office with 7 or 8 trucks and seized everything. He was then taken to a secretive military-run facility in Yangon.
They blindfolded us and the 2 soldiers took me to the dark room. They interrogated me for 3.5 days, non-stop, without sleeping, no water for like 2 days.
He says as the torture continued, it became more severe.
I was beaten like this. There's a two man standing beside me, and their hands put like this to my eardrum. Bum, 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 all the time.
His colleague Han Thayen was also arrested. The journalist covered anti-coup protests and gave interviews to NHK on several occasions. But NHK lost contact with him after receiving this message. Nathan Mao says Han Thayen was subjected to much worse torture because of his connections to members of Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy.
They burned his skin with a secret lid, and there's a big ice block put on his leg for like 24 hours because Hamza didn't give his full PIN number. There was a attempt to rape him. They asked Hamza, took his share and pan. Hamza was crying out, no, please don't. I will give my full passport. So finally, he did it.
Nathan Mao was sent back to the U.S. after his release. He said his freedom is small comfort.
Honestly, I really want to go back to the prison because of all people of Burma are under the brutal regime. Everybody is a lockup. What's the difference? I don't want to be free.
Han Thayen and thousands of others are still being detained. That hasn't stopped protesters from continuing to take to the streets. Nathan Mao says he will still do all he can from outside the country to support them and the people's fight for freedom. สหัทยา ไกรขุนทด NHK World.
Back here in Japan, a Myanmar soccer player who sought asylum here has received special permission to stay and work in the country. Pie Lian Aun came to Japan in May as a member of Myanmar's soccer team for a World Cup qualifier. Before the match, he flashed the three-finger salute, a symbol of resistance to the military coup. The team returned home in June, but Pie Lian Aun stayed behind. He said he feared punishment in Myanmar and applied for refugee status in Osaka, western Japan. A lawyer says Pie Lian Aun visited the Immigration Bureau on Friday and was granted a 6-month permit to live and work in Japan. In May, a special provision was introduced for Myanmar people hoping to stay in Japan due to the instability in their country. The lawyer says Pie Lian Aun has received job offers and intends to work while waiting for a decision on his asylum application. Next in weather, a powerful storm is impacting a group of islands in the Caribbean, while those in Florida are closely watching the system's path. Our meteorologist Jonathan Oh explains the situation in our World Weather Report.
Hello, we are keeping an eye out on Tropical Storm Elsa as it continues to move toward the north and west, the Lesser Antilles, feeling the effects of this storm, and eventually it's going to move toward the north and west. The storm may not become a hurricane, but it's still going to bring with it strong winds and also some heavy rain, with the waves getting pushed up by the momentum of the system. It is expected to continue to move to the north and west, heading south of Cuba, though the cone of concern does include the western and central areas of Cuba, and eventually possibly turning toward the north by the first part of next week and looking toward Florida. So we need to keep an eye out on the system all throughout this area for the next several days, because it looks like it's going to be impacting several locations as it continues to move toward the north and west. In the meantime, up toward the United States, keeping an eye out on a cold front that's moving through on Friday, bringing some rain and some thunderstorms. It eventually moved down toward the south and east, and so we're looking at things starting to clear up into places like Atlanta, down toward Miami, up toward New York and D.C., looking at some wet weather as we go through today on Saturday. Meanwhile, in Europe, we have been watching out for these hot temperatures down toward the Balkan Peninsula. Here's a look at some of the video coming out of Athens, where baking hot weather hit Greece Thursday, forcing the Acropolis to close from 1 to 5 p.m. local time. We saw the mercury hitting around 41 degrees according to that thermometer a second ago. The Acropolis is the most famous ancient monument in Greece, attracting thousands of visitors a day in peak periods. People in Athens had to try to cool down by hitting the beaches, which really has scorched the country for more than a week in terms of the high temperatures. We are expecting temperatures to cool down in Athens, though, by Saturday, 32 degrees with partly cloudy skies, so a little bit cooler coming up. Rain continues for a good portion of Japan. Tokyo and Osaka looking at wet weather as we go through the weekend. Hope you have a wonderful weekend wherever you are.
And one more story to share with you before we go. Major League Baseball star Ohtani Shohei of the Los Angeles Angels will play in the All-Star game later this month as a designated hitter.
Shohei Ohtani, we're talking MVP candidates.
The final results of fan voting to select starters of both the American and National Leagues were released on Thursday. The Japanese two-way sensation won 63% of votes in the final round among 3 players to select the American League's designated hitter spot. Ohtani has smacked 28 home runs so far.